Hi there, Monuments of Freedom class. It's Mrs. Chappie here. At our last class, when we were all together, we talked collaboratively and tried to decide what should we do about this class because this class is mostly about hands-on building stuff. You guys decided that you wanted to try and continue with it, and when we are doing distance learning, I'll be teaching about the monuments, and then hopefully when we're back together, which I'm fingers crossed will be soon, you will actually build the monuments that we were talking about. So just to kind of refresh your memory, what this class is about, just, I know you've heard this before, but it's my job to kind of remind you, we're focusing in on what freedom is like in America and what we use to represent that. So the first thing we talked about was the Statue of Liberty, because liberty represents that freedom that we have. And so we built that Statue of Liberty and we learned about it. From there, we went on to Mount Rushmore, where we talked about American leaders that preserved liberty. We talked about the foundation of the country, having George Washington being the first president to come forth in that idea that freedom and liberty was important to everyone. We had Abraham Lincoln, who preserved the Union. We had Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Declaration of Independence and expanded the size of the Union. And so we spent time talking about the people who preserved that idea of liberty. So monuments of freedom and liberty, we looked at what is freedom and liberty, and then who has contributed dramatically within our country to continue those ideas. And then today, we're going to look at institutions that preserve those ideas of freedom and liberty. My goal was, or my idea was, that we were going to build an actual replica of the White House, because the White House is where the chief executive is. If you've been in any of my other history classes, we've talked a lot about the different branches of government. We have 3 in our country. You guys are like, I know this already, Mrs. Chappie, but we're just reviewing it. So you have one branch that makes laws to protect freedom. And we have one branch that enforces those laws. That would be the executive branch, the President of the United States. The purpose of the executive branch, the purpose of the president, is enforcing the laws, and then interpreting the laws is the Supreme Court. So what I want to talk to you guys about today is specifically the White House, because that represents the idea of enforcing those laws, that executive branch that we have of our government. So I have a spiffy little PowerPoint for you that I'm going to show you. Let's go ahead and open it up here for you. I'm getting better at all of this fancy schmancy stuff. Sort of better at you. So now you're looking at my computer screen. I just have to find my PowerPoint. There it is. It's almost quicker than if we were doing it in class, and I'm having all these technical problems. So not bad at all. So we'll go ahead and we'll put Mrs. Chappie in the corner, and come on, do something fancy, screen. There it goes. So we will be talking about the White House today. There it is, the People's House. You guys have probably, that's one thing that you absolutely recognize, most people, is the White House. The White House, fun facts, nearly 200 or just over 230 years old. There's been a lot of interesting things that have happened there over the years. There's been alligators in the bathroom. So I'm going to go over some fun facts, I guess, about the White House. Clicked below this video, I have YouTube links. There's one that's really kind of cool that breaks down all the different floors and what's on each floor, and it shows you where all of those cool things are. Like, did you know there's a bowling alley in the White House? There used to be an indoor swimming pool. It's actually been covered over. There's a florist, a dentist, a doctor's office, multiple kitchens. It's pretty interesting. It has a long history that I want to talk about kind of quickly with you. So first fun fact, George Washington, our first president, never actually lived in the White House. A lot of people don't realize that. George Washington selected the site of the White House, and he picked it out and was around when the first cornerstone was laid. It was laid in 1792, but he himself never lived there. John Adams was the first president to move into the White House. He and his wife Abigail lived there, but when they moved in, it wasn't quite done yet. Let's see what else about that. Let's see what the next picture I have for you to show you. Oh, so this is showing when Adams lived there and how it was incomplete and there was stuff hanging around and such. The White House, it's gone, it hasn't always existed the way it is now. It was actually burned down once in the War of 1812. The British came into Washington, D.C. at that time, and they stormed the White House, and Dolly Madison was living there. It's when James Madison was president, and she famously is given credit for preserving this picture of George Washington right there. She actually, when I was little, I pictured her running into a flaming building and grabbing it and running off the wall, but she actually instructed her servants to take it down. I have read somewhere that they didn't take it in the frame, they rolled it out of the frame and took it with them. But that was when the White House was actually burned. This is a clip from a movie where it shows the White House was burned. When the White House is today, if you go to Washington, D.C., there's the main residence in the center. This building right here is the main residence, and it has what are called wings off of it. They're like extensions that are built out. There's the East Wing and the West Wing. And when you watch that video that I linked below, you'll be able to see how that is. The West Wing is where the president works. The East Wing is where the First Lady works. And if you go to visit the White House, you enter the White House through the East Wing. Unless you're like a dignitary from another country, then you get to actually go in one of the reception doors in the front or the back. I guess technically they say the White House doesn't have a front or the back. It has a north and a south side, but that's where official dignitaries are received. But normal folk who go for office visits, or it's actually the White House is open to the public. The public can go there. After 9/11, it's not easy to go there. Pre 9/11, the public could just show up in the morning, you get a ticket and stand in line, and then you go into the White House. Now you have to be invited by a member of Congress, and they have to do a security background check on you personally before you get into the White House, and it takes like 3 hours to go through the security thing. You can't take anything with you. You can't even bring your purse. I've had the joy and pleasure of being there a couple of times. I went there back, a long time ago in the 90s when you could just get a ticket and go in. And then I was there actually last summer. I got my Congressman, Tom McClintock, who John Lewis used to work for when he was in Washington, D.C. John Lewis, my kiddo, was able to get our whole family, well, me and my kids anyways, into the White House. So that was kind of cool, but it was quite an ordeal to be able to do that. This is a historic drawing of the White House that I wanted you to see to give you an idea what it looked like after it was burned down. Let's go back to that for a second. So they call it the White House, and it seems common sense. We've seen it. It's all big and it's white, but it wasn't always called the White House. It used to be called a lot of different things. It was referred to as the Executive Mansion. It was called the President's House. Eventually, in about 1901, when Theodore Roosevelt was president, he adopted the like official term White House. And you're probably wondering, why is it white? Well, that's a very good question. Let me answer that for you. It was white because when it was built out of something called out of a porous stone. And it was made white by this lime-based whitewash that they put over the stone to protect it from freezing, because if water got into the porous stone and it froze, if you know from Mrs. Hindmarsh's class from science, that water expands. And so they put this whitewash onto the stone so that the water wouldn't get in and freeze and expand and crack all the facade of it. And so they kept refinishing it, and then finally they just painted it in about, I think it was 1818 that they finally painted the White House, and it stayed white the way it looks now. It's painted instead of just stone. Let's see, what other things do I have? Oh, I have a picture here of Theodore Roosevelt, because it was Theodore Roosevelt who added that west wing to it and took it from this building that's like that and then added the two wings along the side of how we picture it today. So you can see these wings coming out. So over here would be the main residence hall. And then you go down over here into where the offices are. And it's because he didn't want to have his office inside of his house, which makes sense. And that happened, fun fact, 1909. So a couple other quick things about it. There is a kitchen. This is a picture of the actual kitchen in the White House. And the president who lives in the White House and works in the White House, the president's working in that West Wing that I just told you about and lives in the main residence. He gets a salary. It's something over $400,000 a year, but he has to pay for all the food that he eats when he's in there, and he has to pay for all of his toiletries. So in the residence, they bring in toilet paper and toothpaste and whatever he needs, but that he actually has to pay for. Fun little facts on that. Any personal costs the president is responsible for his family. When Kennedy was president, he actually held a little kindergarten upstairs in the residence so that his daughter could go to kindergarten with her friends without having to leave the White House, and that would have had to have been paid for by the president. Our current president, President Trump, donates his entire salary. Another fun fact on the kitchen thing, when Andrew Jackson was president, he used to hang out with all his friends in the kitchen to make important decisions. So instead of consulting with his cabinet that's constitutionally required, each president has those advisors we've talked about in history class that advise the president within the Constitution. They're referred to as the cabinet. When a president gets more advice from his friends instead of the constitutionally approved people by Congress, that's referred to as the kitchen cabinet. And it was Jackson who'd hang out with his pals in this particular kitchen and come up with policy and decisions. And so kitchen cabinet's kind of like a slang for advisors of the president that aren't official. The White House had an indoor swimming pool. It was put in by President Roosevelt, who suffered from polio, and that helped him as a way to exercise and move and give him comfort and relief. And that was the indoor swimming pool that Roosevelt had in there. It is no longer there. It has now been covered up. It's been drained and covered. And whenever you see the president speak in this room, this is the press briefing room. This is actually on top of that swimming pool that you just saw. So that happened when President Nixon was president in 1968. Throughout the presidency, but don't you worry, there still is a swimming pool. It's outside, and for the president to get there, there's an underground tunnel. Carter really liked to swim in the swimming pool. That was like his favorite thing to do. There is a basketball court, which was Obama's favorite thing. So I wanted to talk real quick about pets that lived in the White House. There's always been various pets that have lived there. There was a circus pony that President Taylor had. Jefferson had birds literally that flew around. When Thomas Jefferson was president, he had birds that had kind of the free reign to fly around the White House. I pulled this off of my wall. I wanted to show it to you. This is, can you see it? It's kind of getting a glare on it. This is a replica of the key actually to the White House that Thomas Jefferson had when he would have lived there. This is what it would have looked like. Obviously, it's not the original one, but it shows what it looked like back when the president would have needed a key to get in and out of his own house. President Adams had an alligator in the bathroom of all things. There was Coolidge, he had a bear cub. I have actually a child's book about the animals of the presidents. That would have been fun. I could have showed you that. There were lion cubs that lived there, bobcats, a pygmy hippo once was there, and a wallaby, all kinds of crazy things in the White House. This is President Kennedy with his two kids. President Kennedy was, particularly notable noteworthy because he was young and had these young little children in the White House. You've seen a lot of pictures of them. The White House as it is now, I was telling you a minute ago how difficult it is to get into it, that you need congressional invitation, you need to be vetted by security before you get there. You have to go through security screen after security screen, but then once you're there, you can actually go through the whole lower floor to see all of the reception rooms that are actually used. There's no cost for it. It's the only presidential residence in the world that is free to visit, but you just need to get that special permission. But it wasn't always like that. This picture that I have here on the screen is actually Andrew Jackson's inauguration. It was like a Rip Snorton party. The whole public was invited. Anyone could come in, anyone could come out. It was, by all accounts, historians say, a hoot and a holler, where they were literally, you can see this horse. Can you, here it is. I can't point to the screen, that doesn't help, you know, like going crazy over there. And that they literally had to, they were tearing apart the White House. They had to kind of lure them away with the promise of free alcohol if you come another place. So it wasn't always hard to get into, and some say at this particular party, it was nearly destroyed by the mob under Jackson's inauguration. Another thing about the White House that's worthy of mentioning is that it was in fact built by slaves. So that's kind of a dark history of the White House. Initially, the intention was to import laborers from Europe, but they weren't getting enough people who would volunteer or who would come over and work. And so initially they tried not to use slave labor to do it, but they ended up having to do that. So some of the African Americans were enslaved, but there were also African Americans that built the White House that were free and were compensated for that. As well as the other government buildings that are around it. So you can see this initial building does not have those wings that we have talked about. I threw this on here, just fun facts, because who doesn't like fun facts? Obviously, when the White House was first built, it did not have electricity. And so electricity, of course, had to be added later. It was added in about 1891. And at that time, Benjamin Harrison was president. And like I am with Zoom and technology, because keep in mind, when I was your age, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have streaming, we didn't have internet, we didn't have email, I didn't have any of those things. And so here I'm using this technology, but I didn't grow up with it. So President Harrison, same sort of way, he did not grow up with electricity, and here they're putting electricity into the White House, and it was kind of freaking him out. And both he and his wife were a little bit nervous of it, Caroline, his wife. And so they didn't want to use electricity. And in the White House, along with a lot of people who first got electricity, they continued to use oil lamps at the same time. But this is one of the original light switches, or a photograph of it. Obviously, this center part here is more modern, but this outside copper was original. And President Harrison and his wife were afraid that they would get electrocuted or shocked, so they refused to turn on and off the lights in the White House when they were first added. I wanted to show you some of the cool things that are in the basement. The basement of the White House is basically like a mini mall. The basement is not open to the public. You can just go on to the first floor. But the basement has a bowling alley, a flower shop, a chocolate shop. There's also a dentist office. There's a medical office. Having been in the White House, it has all these things, and it is a mansion. It is huge, but everything is fairly small at the same time. Their bowling alley, it's just, you know, this one little aisle there. There's a movie theater. And again, it's like, it's narrow. Things are kind of narrow and small in there. So I wanted to show you the movie theater. The first movie that was ever shown in the White House was when Woodrow Wilson was president in 1915. The first movie was called Birth of a Nation, for whatever that's worth, if anyone cares for useless Mrs. Chappie trivia. And I think that, my friends, is about all of the fun facts that I have. Now we're back to the beginning here. We don't want to do that. We've already done that. I think that's all the fun facts that I have on the White House. So thanks for listening. I hope you're seeing how it takes a lot to preserve the freedom we have. We have things to remind us of it. We have people who've preserved it. We have institutions like our executive branch that enforce it and protect it. I want to say something real quick about these videos. This one doesn't look as great as the last ones that I made. And that could be maybe because I don't have enough light on. I don't know. I think it's because there's so many people that are using the internet and streaming right now that the HD, the high definition quality, isn't as good. But you're able to hear, and I hope you spend the time to click on those links below because they're interesting. Another thing I have for my, let's see, what would it be? Friday class, I have all of your statues of liberty. So if you guys are people that are sheltering at home and not going out, and your parents feel like they want to take a little drive and you feel like picking them up on my front porch, you can totally do that. I'm going to keep them. They're not going to go anywhere, and I will get them to you. But if you want to come by my house and pick them up, I'm totally happy to put them out on the front porch for you. I know Emma and this is Sagetti's. I said I would take them by your house, and I still am thinking about doing that. Haven't looked up your address yet, but I'm sure I can find it. So I think the kids say hit me up, send me a text, whatever, send me an email if you want to come by and pick that up. So have a great week, and I'll see you later. Bye.